We are making the Saundra skirt today, which is one of my sewing patterns, and this video tutorial is meant to accompany the written instructions in the pattern. So if you don't have the pattern yet, you can follow the link in the description, and that will lead you to the Pattern Hub page where you can get the full pattern for yourself. There's a bunch of information there, fabric requirements, details, tester photos, anything you could want on the Pattern Hub. So head there if you haven't yet. And although I do intend this video tutorial to be very detailed and very helpful so that you can basically just follow it if you want to, those written instructions are there as well to accompany if you need a little bit of extra guidance or illustrations. I really do put so much work into my instructions. I provide so much information in there, so make sure you don't skim over too much, especially make sure you pay attention to the sizing details, the fit details. The finished garment measurement chart is very important in choosing your size. Make sure you're reading through those pages, all the text for fabric requirements, fabric recommendations, the type of fabrics you should be using, elastic length, and even the printing guide. I know sometimes if you are new to digital patterns, PDF patterns, printing the pattern can be a little bit of a learning curve, but I have very detailed instructions in the pattern and an additional video tutorial for printing if you need a little extra help there. So read the instructions. There are 3/4 versions of the Saundra skirt. We are going to make all of them today. So no matter what version you're making, we will cover it in this video tutorial, but I just want to briefly touch on what the versions are just in case. So the first version is the simple skirt. It has vertical panels, which create a very nice A-line shape. The skirt is designed so that there is very little ease throughout the waist, and then it flares out below the hips. So even though there is a comfortable elastic waistband and pockets, all the versions have pockets, there isn't a lot of extra bulk around your tummy. I like to play around with the simple version of the skirt and kind of switch up or alternate fabrics to create a little bit of a patchworky vibe, but you could also just use one fabric for all of the panels as well. The third version adds godets, which are additional pie-shaped panels snuck in between the regular skirt panels that create some extra flounce and twirliness. It's also fun to play around with different fabrics for the godets. You could either do one fabric for the main panels, one fabric for the godets. You could do a couple for each and kind of just have an all-over patchworky vibe, whatever you want to do. And then the third/4th version is lined. So you can line your simple skirt or line your skirt with godets. That's why it's like 3 or 4 versions. And that's mainly for sheer fabrics. My favorite, potentially favorite version of the Saundra skirt that I've made is my white linen skirt. The white linen was very pretty, a little bit see-through, so I lined it and I wear it like 3 times a week. A note about lining though, if you are gonna line your skirt, whether it's simple or the godet version, make sure you're choosing lightweight fabrics for the lining especially, but with all of those fabrics, the main fabric, the godet fabric, the lining fabric, the pockets, it can get a bit heavy if you are choosing a heavy fabric for any of those elements. So I would highly recommend choosing lightweight fabrics if you are adding a lining. Like I said, we are covering all versions in this tutorial. It's a bit of a choose your own adventure. The written instructions have very clearly detailed boxes throughout that kind of guide you on which steps to skip depending on what version you're doing. And similarly, this video has timestamps in the description so you can skip around to whatever parts of it are relevant to you and the version that you are making. And because we are doing all the versions, I will be making 2 skirts today. So I'm going to walk you through the pattern pieces and the fabrics that we're using in the video tutorial. So my simple skirt is going to be a denim today, which I'm very excited about. When I designed this skirt, one of the versions I had in mind was denim. So this is a lightweight 4-ounce denim in kind of like a medium, light medium wash. There's a clear right side and wrong side to the fabric. When we're in construction, you'll be able to very clearly tell the right and wrong side. This is one of the main skirt panels. You will be cutting 10 of these if you're doing a simple skirt, and there are notches that you'll need to cut or mark with a pen or pencil. For the simple skirt, there are 2 near the top. I've marked one there in pen and one there in pen, and then one about halfway down the skirt. There's another notch there. Make sure you're not skipping those. There are also little dot markings on the pattern. You don't need to mark those if you're doing a simple skirt. Those are specifically for godets. The only other pattern piece you need for the simple skirt is the pocket bag. You'll be cutting 4 of those mirrored, which basically means that they are reflections of one another. So as you can see, these are as if they're reflected in a mirror, and you need 2 sets of these, so 1 of each. The pocket bags just have 1 notch on them on this straight edge. It's right there. Make sure you're not skipping that. And then we will be doing a godet skirt with lining. Lots of fabric going on there. For the main fabric, we have this strawberry linen viscose blend. But again, you're gonna cut 10 of these pieces, and the same notches are marked on this one that were on the simple skirt. However, you also need to mark your godets, which are a little dot on your pattern piece. I've marked mine with a pencil and kind of like a little X. So there's one there and one there. And those are all the markings for the skirt panel. I also have cut 8 godets, which again are like pie-shaped panels. Today I'm doing a red like daisy fabric. This one clearly has a right and wrong side, which is mainly why I chose it. It's maybe a little bit bolder than I would have done as a godet with this like lighter fabric, but I want to make sure you can really see what's going on in this video, which is why I chose it. I marked my notches on my godets on the wrong side of the fabric, just because it's easier to see than on the red. So there's one notch about halfway down this edge, right there, if you can see it. And then you also need to mark the dot at the top of the godet, which again, I've marked with a bit of an X. So 8 of those. Then I have cut 4 lining pieces. Again, highly recommend a lightweight fabric. This is a thin, lightweight muslin. This is the only fabric that doesn't have a clear right and wrong side today. I kind of had to do it that way for the lining because if it did have some sort of print or pattern on it, you would be able to see it through the skirt. And so as we are doing construction, I will call out as often as possible, this is the right side, this is the wrong side for this white lining, but all the rest of the fabrics have clear right and wrong sides. There are a couple notches on this lining piece. They're both near the top. They reflect the same as the main skirt. There is one there and one down there. So 4 of those. Finally, I have pocket bags for the godet skirt as well. They're the exact same as the other pocket bags. They just have the one notch that's down on this side here. 4 of those mirrored as well. So those are all of our fabrics. We are going to jump into construction, starting off with putting the panels together for the simple skirt. If you have a godet version, you will skip this very first step that we're gonna do. You can head to the timestamps and see where you will be beginning. I will be calling out the corresponding written instructions, the numbers that go along with what we are doing in the video. So right now we're doing steps 1 through 4. Here we have our first skirt panel, that's pattern piece A. We're going to lay that right side down, so the wrong side is up at the moment. And then we are going to take a second skirt panel piece and lay it so that the wrong sides are touching. I'm going to line up the top and bottom edges and all the notches along this side here. And I'm going to clip my 2 pieces together. You can do clips, pins, whatever you want. I've linked these clips in the description because you'll see me use them a lot, but it doesn't matter which you prefer. And now we'll be stitching a straight stitch along that edge that I just clipped together at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'll put the seam allowance on the screen anytime I'm sewing anything for easy access. I also have a seam allowance guide in the instructions, and it's at the top of every instruction page. So if you're ever looking for it, it should be easily accessible. At this stage, you may want to check your fabric for any fraying. My denim was fraying a bit more than other fabrics I had used when making this skirt, and that is going to affect your next seam. So you'll want to trim away any of those little bits. I didn't clip into the seam allowance at all. I just trimmed off the little floaty frays. And I will be doing this after every seam, although I don't show it every single time. So keep that in mind if you want to be trimming your frayed edges as well. Now take those 2 pattern pieces that we stitched together, splay them out flat, and press the seam allowance toward one side. It really doesn't matter which side, just pick one. Pressing the seam allowance flat on this step helps with the next step, which is folding those pattern pieces on top of each other, this time right sides together, and pressing along that seam. If you didn't press it to one side first, it would just be much more difficult to get this seam pressed in half crisply. Now we are going to stitch along this folded edge at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you may be wondering, if you're a beginner, why are we doing this seam twice? Why did we stitch it once, fold it, and stitch it again? This is called a French seam, and it encloses the seam allowance and creates a really beautiful, clean finish. It is, I guess, twice the stitches, but in my opinion, it's worth it. Now we're going to press the seam allowance toward one side, and again, it doesn't matter which side, and that is the end of your first French seam. If you don't want to do French seams, because we try to do them as much as possible in this pattern, if you don't want to do them, you can finish your seams however you want to do that. Zigzag stitch, serger, flat felled seams, any sort of fancy seam finish you want, but we are going to be attaching the rest of these panels with French seams. Basically, you take the steps that we just did, and you are going to continue to do those until you have 2 sides of the skirt with 5 panels each. So because we've already done one, you know how to do it, you can do the rest of them kind of in bulk. So you can see here, I'm pinning them all at once. I'm gonna stitch them all at once, iron them all at once. Just goes a little bit quicker. So here is one side of my skirt after I've done the first stitch, and then the second stitch. You can see the seam allowances are very nice, neat, beautifully enclosed. At this stage, I was struck with inspiration and decided to top stitch my seam allowance down. So I just did 2 stitches, one right along the edge of the seam and one 1/4 inch away from the first stitch that I had done. And I used a denim top stitching thread that I had on hand. So this isn't in the pattern, it's just something that on a whim I thought would look cute, and I do love how it turned out. It's time to make some godets. If your skirt does not have godets, you can go ahead and skip through this section. We're going to start by finishing the raw edge at the top of each godet. It's just like a little strip of fabric there. And you can use your serger, zigzag stitch, whichever you want to do. I'll link my tutorial here for finishing your seam allowances with a zigzag stitch on your regular machine if you don't have a serger and want to have a little more information about how to finish raw edges. Set your godets aside for now. We are going to be working with the skirt panels. So you did mark those notches when you cut your fabric. There's 2 kind of near the top, and then there's that godet marking, that's the little dot. So you're going to lay 2 skirt panels together, right sides together, and you are going to pin them between those 2 notches. For now, we're just going to stitch down to the dot. So I'm remarking my pencil lines on the wrong side of my fabric. I had marked them on the right side, so I wanted to be able to clearly see them when I'm making this stitch. Those little dots are very important because this stitch is going to stop right on top of the dot. Do not go past it. I do a little bit of a back stitch here. Normally with godets, you don't want to back stitch. It's kind of like a dart where you would tie your threads off instead. But I have found that because these godets are not super wide, like the angle isn't very wide, it doesn't create much extra bulk. So I do back stitch a little bit. You can tie your threads off if you prefer. I had to widen my seam allowance right as I was coming up to the dot to be able to touch it. Totally fine. I probably just cut my fabrics a smidge wide. Now we're going to press that seam allowance flat, and you can go down a little bit past where you stitched into the opening there, but I wouldn't go too far. Now we're going to add in our godet panels. So I have the 2 skirt panels we've stitched together. I'm going to kind of toss one off to the side, get it out of the way a little bit. Then we're going to lay the godet panel right sides together on top of the other skirt panel. We're going to pin that or clip it, lining up notches. So there's a notch in the center here, and then also the top of the godet matches up with the notch on the skirt panel that is the closest to the little godet dot. Now when I pinned it together, I had the godet sitting on top because I feel like it's easier to see that way what's going on. But when I stitch it, I'm actually going to stitch with the skirt panel on top because I find that easier, and I feel like you'll see why. So we are going to start right on top of that dot. Right where we left off of the skirt panel is where we're going to start our stitch now. And the reason I'm stitching with the skirt panel on top is because you can see both the godet dot and you can see exactly where your stitch left off. I wanted to give you a little bit of a peek of what's going on underneath here. Everything's kind of pushed off to the side. Make sure that there's no like bunching or lumpiness or anything folded over that shouldn't be. It should be nice and smooth and flat. So you're going to start stitching, like I said, right on top of that dot. Again, I'm going to do a little bit of a back stitch, not too much, and then I'm going to continue down the seam here at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once that stitch is done, you will be able to see here where I started and stopped right on the dot for both stitches, and then when you flip it around, you can see that it lands pretty neatly on top of the dot on the opposite side as well. Now it is time to attach the godet to the other skirt panel. So you are going to pin it to the skirt panel that has been kind of like hanging off the edge here, right sides together, again, lining up notches the same as you did on the other side. And this time we are going to come at the stitch from the bottom of the godet and skirt panel instead of on the dot. So we'll start at the bottom and then we will finish on the dot this time. Again, I'm going to do that stitch with the skirt panel on the top because it's easier that way to see where your stitch is going to leave off. You can see that dot better. Now that the godet is completely inserted, you can see where your 2 stitches meet up near the top of the godet. And to be honest, this is not one of my best. I'd say my stitches are about 2 millimeters apart. I thought about redoing it, but I feel like it's a good example to show that it's not 100% perfect, but that will do just fine. So don't stress too much. You can also see my pencil marking a little bit on the outside. I erased it a little bit and the rest will wash out in the wash. Now we need to finish our raw edges. So I'm gonna do that with my serger. You can do that, zigzag stitch. Now because the seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch, I'm going to simultaneously trim a little bit of that away as well. If you're doing a zigzag stitch, you could cut some off with scissors and then do your zigzag stitch. However you wanna do it, you can leave it as is. There's a reason that the seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch. You could read more about that at the beginning of the written instructions, but I just want to trim mine a little bit. I feel like it looks a little neater. Then we are going to give our seam allowance a little bit of a press. So at the top of the skirt panel, you're going to press it open flat like we did previously. And then for the godets, you're going to press the seam allowance toward the skirt and away from the godet. And with that, your first godet is finished. Pat yourself on the back, you did a wonderful job. For the rest of the godets, you can either insert them one by one, or you can do each step in bulk. You can attach all of the skirt panels together first, then you can do one side of the godets or all of the godets at the same time, then the other side of the godets all at the same time. I prefer to do mine one at a time just because it is so much fabric. I feel like it gets a little bit overwhelming to have so many dangly bits, so I like to do each godet in completion one at a time, but however you want to do it is totally fine. It's time for my favorite section, which is pockets, specifically pockets if you are not doing a lining. So we are going to finish these with French seams, so you don't need to do any sort of finishing of your edges at this stage. Also, the construction is the same whether you have godets or not. We're just showing it on a non-godet version for ease of visibility. This is the top edge of the skirt, and I'm actually going to snip teeny tiny snips into the notches that I had previously drawn on with pen. I feel like the construction of this part is easier if you have cut notches instead of pen, but only teeny tiny snips. Then we are going to lay the pockets on top of the skirt, wrong sides together first, so wrong sides touching. And I'm going to line up the notches. So there's a notch on the pocket that lines up with a notch on the skirt, and then the top edge of the pocket lines up with the other notch on the skirt. We are going to stitch along the edge where we have pinned those pockets at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Keep in mind that during pocket construction, I often only show one pocket or one side of the skirt, but there are 4 pockets and 2 sides of the skirt, so repeat all of these steps on all of the pockets. And also keep in mind some of these steps will be mirrored because the pockets are reflections of each other, and so the direction we're stitching or the place we're pinning things will be mirror images of each other. Here I'm just trimming off a little bit of those frayed edges again, not snipping into the seam allowance at all. Now we are going to splay the pockets open and press the seam allowance toward one side. I usually press it toward the pocket, but I guess it doesn't really matter. And then we are going to fold that pocket over and press along the folded edge. At this stage, you'll notice that the seam allowance is kind of folded in where the pocket is folded, obviously. We want that to lay flat. So we are going to snip into that seam allowance just a little bit, 1/4 inch or so, but not past where you have stitched in the previous step. That will allow the seam allowance to lay flat, and it might feel wrong, but just trust me, it's actually going to come together very nicely. There will not be any weird wonky edges. You will be very pleased with yourself. Now we are going to go in with a second stitch, as we do with French seams, this time at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance right along the edge of the pocket there. Splay your pocket open one more time and give it a good press right along the seam. And now we're going to understitch the seam allowance in place. Essentially what that means is we're going to stitch right along the edge of the seam that we just made, stitching on the pocket side, not on the skirt side. So that secures the seam allowance underneath the pocket so that when you're wearing the skirt, the pockets don't pop out as easily. Here's a bit of a look at how your pocket should be looking right now. There's a few different, stitches and snips here and there, but overall, it should be pretty clean at this stage. You should have 2 sides of your skirt now completely constructed with the pockets added, and now we are going to attach them to one another. So you're going to lay your 2 sides of the skirt on top of each other, wrong sides together, line up all the notches, and pin or clip it in place. I mainly use clips, but I do like to put a couple little pins right in this pocket area here. I feel like that helps kind of hold everything together around the pocket as I'm removing clips while I sew. I'm starting here at the bottom edge of the skirt. I'm going up along the side seam, and then I'm going to curve and pivot around the pockets. You'll see when I get right below the pocket, I am going to lift my presser foot up, but leave my needle in, pivot around, and then keep going around the pocket bag. Try to stay as close to a 1/4 inch seam allowance as possible throughout this whole process. Again, when I get to the top of the pocket bag, I'm going to lift my presser foot, pivot, and continue out the top of the skirt. And that is your first pass at the side seam done. I'm going to show you a little bit of a close-up of how the top and bottom edges of your pocket bag should look, because it can be a little bit counterintuitive or just different than you might normally do your pockets. So I want to give you a little bit of a peek at that. And now we are going to make 2 little snips into these corners. So I want you to be very conservative when you're making these snips. Do not snip into your stitches. So I'm just gonna do teeny tiny snips, one in that top corner, one in that bottom corner. That just makes it easier when you turn your pocket inside out. There will be less bulk in those corners. Once again, you can see I'm dealing with some fraying around my raw edges, so I'm just gonna give them a little bit of a trim, get those out of the way so that they don't poke through my French seams. And then it's time to do the old press the seam allowance toward one side, any side, pick whichever one you want. Obviously you can't really press the seam allowance on the pocket yet, so just do the top and bottom of the side seam, don't worry about the pocket. And then you are going to fold along that edge and turn the pocket inside out. Press along that folded edge, and you may need to give the pocket a little bit of extra attention. I like to take my fingers and kind of roll along that folded edge to get it to lay nice and flat, because we don't want a lumpy pocket. And now we are going to take our second pass at this side seam, again going around the pocket bag and toward the bottom. So we're starting at the top this time, going in with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And this time when you come up to where the top of the pocket bag is, you'll see those stitches that you did previously. You'll want to come right alongside those stitches, but on the skirt side. So make sure that those stitches are enclosed in your new seam allowance. Pivot the presser foot like we did previously, and then continue around the pocket bag at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you may notice I do a little bit of back stitching both before and after I pivot my presser foot. That's not necessary. It's kind of just instinct to make sure that those stitches stay in place. With so many layers of fabric, I don't want those to, pop open. Once you finish your seam at the bottom of the skirt, this is what your pocket should look like. I'll give you a little bit of a close-up. So you'll see your stitch there is coming right alongside your previous stitches, and here is the bottom corner where it comes alongside of those stitches as well. We're going to press that seam allowance toward one side. Again, it doesn't really matter which, but at this stage you are going to press your pocket toward whatever side of the skirt you want to be the front. Both sides are identical, so it doesn't really matter which one you pick, but whichever one you pick needs to be reflected the same on your other side of the skirt so that the pockets are both on the same side, which will be the front of your skirt. You're going to pin your pocket bags to that front side of your skirt and baste it in place. A basting stitch is just a long stitch. I put mine at 5mm stitch length because we are going to unpick that stitch later. So the closer your stitch length, the more difficult it's going to be to unpick. So just keep that in mind. You do want the top edge of your pocket bag to be parallel to the top edge of your skirt. It doesn't have to be exactly 100% perfect, so don't beat yourself up about it. It just can't be at a crazy angle. And that brings us to the end of the pockets if you do not have a lining. If you do have a lining, we are going to jump into that now. A quick reminder that my lining does not have a clear right or wrong side. I am going to call it out as much as possible, and it also is clearly referenced in the written instruction illustrations. You should have cut 4 identical lining pieces. We are going to lay 2 of them wrong sides together, lining them up along the notches, and we are going to stitch along this edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is going to end up being the center front or center back seam of your lining, whereas with your regular outer skirt shell, you have 5 panels on each side, 10 panels total. With the lining, you have 2 panels on each side, 4 panels total around the entire skirt. Now you are going to press that seam allowance toward one side, then you will fold your lining over along that seam and press the folded edge. Now we will go back in with another stitch at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance this time, and that will enclose your previous seam allowance, creating a beautiful French seam for this lining. Press your seam allowance to one side and repeat these steps on the other 2 panels of linings that you have. So now you should have a front and back, each with 2 panels for your lining. We are going to finish the raw edges on the sides of your lining panels with your serger or with a zigzag stitch. And we are going to be doing this with a few different pattern pieces. So here we have our first half of our lining, second half of our lining. Each of these are finished along the edges with my serger. Then we have the front and back pieces of our skirt with godets. You're going to finish the sides of those as well. And then we have our pocket bags. There are 4 of those, and you need to finish all edges of the pocket bag. So you can see here, my serger has gone around the entire pocket bag so that every raw edge is finished. Here we have the top edge of our skirt with the wrong side facing up. This construction is the same whether you have godets or not. This version, we just happen to have godets. So you're going to lay the right side of your lining against the wrong side of your skirt. Pin those top edges together, and then we are going to stitch a basting stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. A basting stitch is just a longer stitch length. I do about 5 millimeters, and that will just hold the 2 layers together so that during waistband construction, you're not dealing with a bunch of unconnected layers. Once you've basted along the top edge, it is time to add our pockets. You're going to lay the pockets right sides together with your skirt, and keep in mind the lining is underneath there. You're going to be attaching all 3 of these layers at the same time. So there are notches on the pockets that line up with the notches on the skirt, and the top of the pocket bag also lines up with the notch on the skirt. Here you can clearly see that I have all 3 layers pinned together. So we have lining layer, then the skirt layer, and then the pocket bag. We're going to stitch along the side of the skirt here to attach the pockets, and we're going to start all the way at the top edge of the skirt and go all the way down to where the pocket bag ends. Do not go past where the pocket bag ends, just stop right at the edge there and backstitch a little bit. Keep in mind that a lot of the steps I'm showing you for the pockets and the lining, I just show you one pocket or one side of the skirt, and make sure you're doing it on all 4 pockets or both sides of the skirt. Now splay those pockets you just attached out on your ironing board and give them a press, pressing the seam allowance toward the pockets. Then we are going to understitch your seam allowance in place by doing a little stitch right along the edge of that seam you just made on the side of the pocket bag. And this secures the seam allowance underneath the pocket bag, which helps the pockets not pop out as you're wearing the skirt. Again, you'll want to stop that stitch right at the bottom of the pocket bag, and you may notice that there's a little godet marking on the side of your skirt here. That's totally fine. It will wash out if you used a washable pen. At this stage, you should have 2 sides of your skirt with linings and pockets attached. We are going to lay those 2 sides on top of each other, right sides together, and pin from the top edge of the skirt all the way around the pocket bag and a little bit down past as well. You should be pinning through all 4 layers, both linings and both skirts. And I also like to put a couple pins right in this edge of the pocket here. I find that it just helps keep everything together as I'm stitching around the edge of the pocket. Starting at the top edge of the skirt, you are going to stitch down along the side seam with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. When you get to the pocket bag, you're going to lift your presser foot up, but leave your needle in and pivot. I also backstitch a little bit before and after I pivot just to help hold the seam in place. And then I'm going to follow around the edge of the pocket bag, curving, pivoting, turning whenever I need to. When you get near the end of the pocket bag, you are going to continue your stitch 5/8 of an inch past the seam allowance on the side of the skirt, which is about a 1/4 inch past your previous stitch that attached the pocket. Here you can clearly see where I ended my stitch, and I definitely did a few back stitches just to really secure it in place. At this stage, the side seam of your skirt below the pocket bag is still wide open. So we are going to stitch the side seam of the main skirt and the lining separately. This is where it gets fun / magical. So we are going to stitch up the main skirt first. So you can see here, I moved the lining out of the way just so we don't have to deal with it. And I clipped together the side seam of the main skirt. We are going to make a stitch starting at the bottom edge of your skirt and going up until we meet where our stitch left off below the pocket bag. Stick with me, I'll make sure to show you explicitly where we stop. As we get closer to the pocket bag, slow down, make sure the lining is out of the way, tucked up and under, and make sure that you can kind of have some visibility of what's going on here. It's okay if you need to kind of pause, lift the layers back, make sure everything's out of the way, because this part is very important. I'm going to use a pencil to point out what I'm talking about. So there are 2 stitches that you might see. The first one is on the left. That's the one that we want to meet back up with. That's the one that we finished off rounding the corner of the pocket bag. It's tucked up under a little bit where the other stitch is. So if you can't get right on top of it, it's totally fine if you're still a few millimeters away from it, but try to get as close as possible without stitching over your lining. Now that we've stitched up the side seam of your main skirt, we are going to go into the lining. So push your main skirt out of the way, and we are going to clip or pin along the side seam of your lining. I wanted to note here that the spot directly below your pocket bag, you won't be able to push the main skirt completely out of the way because it is stitched in place there, but that's totally fine. As you're stitching along the side seam of the lining here, when you get right up to that pocket bag, you'll stitch over a little bit of seam allowance of your main skirt, but it's totally fine because it's on the seam allowance and not the outside of the skirt. So starting at the bottom edge of the lining, you are going to make a stitch up along the side seam with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. When I'm coming up to the bottom edge of my pocket bag, when I'm going to meet up with my previous stitch, I actually went in with a kind of a scant 5/8 of an inch seam allowance just because I didn't want to stitch over top of the main skirt's stitch. You don't need to stress too much about that. It kind of just felt right in the moment to me, but you will see my stitch here is a little bit wavy and wonky right as it meets back up with my previous stitch. And I actually did go back in a second time because I felt like the first time I didn't go up quite far enough. So always be conservative on your first pass, and you can always stitch more if you need to. It's easier to stitch a little bit more than unpick if you go too far. I'm going to freeze for a second here because I feel like it's a little bit tricky with this white thread to see on the white fabric. So I was trying to meet up to this yellow dot. That's where my previous stitch had left off. That was my target. The pink dot is where my thread ended up finishing after I went back the second time. So I didn't get quite on top of it. I just got close enough where it felt right and I wasn't going too far over. So especially with the lining, get as close as you can get, but it's not a big deal if you can't get directly on top of where you're trying to go. All right, let's finish up this lining and pocket situation. So first we are going to press the seam allowance of the side seam flat, both for the main skirt and for the lining. Obviously you can't really press the pocket, so you're just going to have to press the side seam around the pocket. At this stage, both sides of your skirt are exactly the same, so choose one of them, whichever one you want to be the front of the skirt, and whichever side you choose, you are going to fold, press, and pin your pockets on that side of the skirt. And make sure that the top edge of your pocket bag is parallel to the top edge of your skirt. We're then going to baste those pocket bags in place with a basting stitch, which has a 5mm stitch length. We will be unpicking this stitch later. This is just to hold it in place throughout the waistband construction. Final thing to do with the lining is to hem it. So because the hem of the lining is squared off, it's not a curved edge, all we need to do is fold it up and press it twice. So I folded up a 1/4 inch once, press, and then fold it up a 1/4 inch again, press again, and then edge stitch that hem in place. Easy peasy. I honestly don't even really measure it. I kind of just eyeball it because it's the lining and no one's really gonna see it. And if I'm like a 1/4 inch off, it's not a huge deal. And there you have a beautifully finished hem for your lining. We are not going to be touching the lining anymore. The rest of the steps are going to be the same whether you have a lining or godets or not. So for visibility's sake, we are just going to be showing the version with no godets and no lining. We're going to walk through a very fun construction method for the waistband, which will leave you with a really clean finish. It can get a tad tricky if you're working with thick fabrics or if your sewing machine just does not do well with a lot of layers or doesn't have a lot of horsepower. I would say most home sewing machines would be perfectly fine with this method, but just a note, you can always opt for a different waistband method, like if you just want to fold down a channel for your elastic and insert it with a safety pin. But how we are going to start with our method is we are going to fold the top edge of our waistband down 1 5/8 of an inch and press it in place. I'm using my hot ruler here, which is a tool that I find extremely helpful for things like waistbands and hems. If you're working with thicker layers or a lining, you may want to fold this down a little bit extra, like 1 3/4 inch. It's time to grab the elastic you cut. We are going to connect the two ends into a circle by overlapping them 1/2 of an inch and zigzag stitching them in place. The pattern says this multiple places, but I just want to reiterate that the waistband elastic right now probably seems too small and like it's going to be too tight, but it will stretch out in this construction method. We're going to top stitch it a couple different times. So trust the process, it will stretch out quite a bit. Your zigzag stitch here does not have to be pretty, it just needs to be secure. And also for the stitch settings, I kind of just go with my gut. So you can copy what I did when I started stitching, or you can do whatever you prefer. Now we are going to mark our elastic into 8 equidistant sections. So it doesn't really matter where you start, just fold your elastic in half to start off and mark along both of those folds. Then you are going to match those marks that you just drew together and mark the folds that they created. So basically you'll keep folding, marking, matching up marks, marking halfway between each mark until you have those 8 equidistant sections. Once that's done, you will complete basically the same process along the top edge of your skirt. But this time you want to use the side seams as your first halfway points or first folds. And then you'll mark the center front, center back, and then the halfway points between side seams, center front, and the side seams and center back. So again, you'll end up with 8 equidistant sections. You might see where this is going. Basically what we're going to do now is line up all of those marks that we made on your elastic and on the top of your skirt so that the elastic is kind of equally placed along that top edge when we attach the waistband. Do make sure that you are pinning the elastic to the right side of your skirt. And what you should end up with is something that looks like this. You've just set yourself up for a much easier time on our next step, which is stitching the elastic to the top edge of your skirt. Doesn't really matter where you start this stitch. You just want to drop your presser foot and needle somewhere along the top edge of your skirt. And you are going to kind of grab onto 2 of the pins that you've placed and stretch the elastic in between that section to match up with the width of your skirt. Keep repeating that process, stretching each section, stitching on top of it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance until you've gone all the way around the skirt. If you're new to top stitching elastic, which is much less intimidating than it seems, I promise, my biggest piece of advice is to hold tension not only in front of the elastic, but also behind. So if you're not holding tension behind and just pulling from the front, your needle and feed dogs are not going to guide the elastic and fabric through. I'm definitely holding it from both sides and letting the machine kind of just helping it push the material through. I'm not really the one pushing too much, but you definitely want to make sure you're holding on both sides. This is what the top edge of your skirt should look like at this stage. And so far, the waistband will be stretched out a little bit. This is a good place to try it on just to kind of see how much it's been stretched out, and keep in mind it will stretch out even further. So at this stage, it should be a little bit snug, but not like super duper tight, but it definitely should not be loose. If it is loose, I would recommend unpicking and cutting your elastic shorter. Better to do it now than 15 minutes from now, trust me. What I'm doing now is I am folding the elastic under twice until it is enclosed entirely within the fabric and pinning it in place. The second fold that you're making here should line up pretty closely to that preparation fold and press that you did in step 39. I also wanted to show you an example of what the lined version looks like at this point, because it is a bit thicker, there's a bit more going on, but I don't want it to intimidate you. In fact, for both versions, lined or unlined, you don't need everything to lay perfectly flat at this stage. It's not really going to lay flat no matter what you do until you stitch it in place. So just do the best you can, clipping or pinning this fold down every few inches around the waistband. All right, we're basically gonna do what we did with the last top stitching of the waistband. You can start anywhere, drop your presser foot and your needle into the edge of your waistband at any place. And then along with pulling tension in each section that you're going to do, I also want you to pay attention to the fabric of your skirt that is on the waistband to make sure that it is folded properly. And again, that's why we made that first preparation fold and press, so that as you're doing this step, you can kind of see where that fold should be. And if it doesn't line up perfectly, that's totally fine, but use it as a guide so that your fabric doesn't get super bunchy and weird. Also with this stitch, make sure that it is running over the top of the pocket bags where you basted them in place. Feel free to go slow throughout this step. I definitely do, especially over each seam. And the seams in particular for this denim version too, because they are top stitched and so they are quite thick. So it's a little bit of a mountain every time my presser foot needs to go over the seams. I just help it along best I can. Go slow, take your time. Once again, I wanted to give you a little peek inside this step for the lined version. This step is the primary reason why I recommended that you do not use bulky fabrics, especially if you are doing a lining, because if you have 2 layers of thick fabric and you're folding them over so many times and top stitching the elastic, it's gonna give you a bit of trouble. So hopefully you listened to me. And here we have our beautifully finished waistband. You'll see it still has quite a bit of stretch in it, but it is stretched out from where it started. Now we get to unpick our basting stitches that were keeping our pockets in place. My biggest piece of advice here is just to double and triple check that you are unpicking the right thread. You do not want to unpick the waistband that you just beautifully sewed. I like to give my waistband a little bit of a press here, especially on bulky fabrics. It just helps it lay nice and flat. We have officially arrived at the final step of the pattern, which is the rolled hem. So find the bottom edge of your skirt and we are going to stitch a basting stitch all the way around this bottom edge at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now the purpose of this stitch is not really to secure anything like a normal stitch would. This is just to mark the place 3/8 of an inch away from the bottom edge of the skirt. Because in the next step, we are going to fold the bottom edge up just beyond where we stitched and press along the entire edge. Now you may feel like we're doing a few extra stitches here that are unnecessary. That's a valid thought. Normally I am in that boat as well. However, I do think following the appropriate process for a rolled hem creates a very beautiful finish, and I highly recommend doing it as written. Speaking of extra stitches, now we are going to go in with an edge stitch all the way around the fold that we just pressed up. And again, because this stitch isn't going to be structural, it's not really holding anything in place long term, I'm just going to do a basting stitch because it goes way faster to do it that way. Now the seam allowance at the bottom edge of your skirt should look something like this. And what we're going to do is we are going to trim that excess seam allowance away. This is another place where I'm going to recommend taking your time, going slow, snipping with caution. You only want to trim away the seam allowance. You do not want to accidentally snip into your skirt. Now the trimming of this seam allowance can be a little bit awkward with where you place your hands. The way that I'm doing it here, I have found is my favorite way to do it, where I'm holding my left hand kind of like up and over where I'm snipping with the scissors, holding a little bit of tension so that I'm pulling the seam allowance away from the skirt a little bit. I have found that that is very helpful. I also think it's helpful to cut while your skirt is laying flat, like here. And holy lighting change. This is the time of day where my studio, 1 minute looks yellow, the next minute looks blue. Sorry if that's throwing you off. All right, now you should have a little baby hem with a little baby seam allowance. We are going to fold it up and over one more time, press that in place, and then you probably guessed it, we are going to edge stitch that little baby hem in place. And for this final stitch, I do about a 3mm stitch length, a little bit longer than my default. I just find for hems, I like to lengthen that a little bit. If you don't like doing so many stitches for such a little hem, they do have rolled hem feet for sewing machines. I have not tried that yet, but I would love to. Either way, I love how the rolled hem looks, and I hope you do too. And with the hem done, your skirt is all finished. I hope you love it. I'm obsessed with the versions that I made in this tutorial. This denim one especially, I feel like I'm going to be wearing it at least once a week. It's going to be in the rotation for sure. Top stitching was also the move. Very happy that I ended up doing that. I would love to see your Saundra skirts. Tag me on Instagram, TikTok. Sometimes people just like email me pictures of the patterns of mine that they've made. Love that. Love seeing the things that you guys are working on. Let me know in the comments how this tutorial went for you, especially if there were certain parts that you really loved or were especially fun. Personally, I love the French seam pockets. Those are probably the funnest, most like satisfying construction bit for me. Now you have another handmade item to add to your wardrobe. You can check out my website for all the other patterns that I have. I also have some free tutorials here on YouTube as well. And I'm always just sharing the things I'm sewing for myself and crafting, crocheting, knitting, all that good stuff. So thank you for joining me today, and I will see you guys next time.